6 years ago, I stood at a graveside and buried my only son. Closed casket. They wouldn't let me see his face one last time. I heard the dirt hit the wooden lid. I cried until there was nothing left to cry. And I believed my son's story had ended right there, under the frozen ground. I was wrong. 6 years later, at exactly 4:20 inches the morning, the phone in my kitchen rang, and a stranger's voice came down the line that turned the blood in my body to ice. Granddad. One word. One single word. And it shattered everything I'd ever believed was true. Because my son had never married. He'd never had a child. At least, that's what everyone believed. Myself included. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the receiver. Then the voice went on, one sentence at a time, like the blade of a knife. I'm Reuben's son. For years, nobody was allowed to know I existed. My mother just died. The boy's voice caught. And now there are people hunting me. If they find me before you can get to me, they'll kill me. I remember that moment. I forgot how to breathe. Because whoever was on the other end of that line didn't just know my son's name. He knew things no con artist on this earth could have known. Secrets that should have been buried forever under that grave 6 years ago. And in that instant, a cold thought ran straight down my spine. Maybe my son had never told me the whole truth. Maybe the man lying under that frozen ground had carried a secret so big that 6 years later, someone was still willing to kill to bury it one more time. Let me back up. My name is Lowell Hartigan. I'm 70 years old and I live alone on a hillside street above the lake in Duluth, Minnesota, in a narrow wooden house that creaks all winter like an old ship. I was a high school history teacher for most of my life, then the principal of that same school until they made me retire. I have bad knees, a hearing aid in my left ear, and a furnace that I argue with. I am not a brave man. I want that on the record from the start. Whatever you think this story is going to be about, it is not about a tough man. At 70, I don't sleep the way I used to. My body wakes me around 3 and won't give the night back. So that February morning I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of decaf going cold in my hands, watching the snow stack up against the window glass. Lake Superior was throwing wind at the house. The kind of wind that finds every gap in the siding and makes the whole place moan low, like it's grieving something. Then the phone rang. Not my cell. The old landline on the kitchen wall, the one almost nobody has the number to anymore. The screen showed a string of digits with an area code I didn't recognize. I let it ring 3 times. I still don't know why. Maybe some animal part of me was bracing for a blow it could already feel coming. I picked it up and said hello, and there was a long silence, and underneath the silence I could hear wind, open country wind. Then the voice, Granddad, I need you to listen to me, and I know how this is going to sound. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my cold kitchen holding the phone, watching the snow come down in the porch light. Here is the thing you have to understand. My son, Wesley, no, I'll give him the name he had in my life. My son Reuben died on an icy county road outside Brainerd 6 years ago. They told me his pickup slid into a ravine in the dark. Closed casket. He'd never married. He'd never, that anyone on this earth knew, had a child. Who is this? I finally said. My voice came out like gravel. My name's Eli. I'm Reuben's son. You don't know me. Nobody was supposed to know me. But my mom's gone now and you're the only family I've got left. And there are people looking for me, and if they find me, they're going to kill me. I sat down. I hadn't realized I'd been standing. And then this boy, this voice, started telling me things he could not possibly have known. He told me I lived on a hill above the water. He told me my wife's name was Eleanor, and that she'd died of a stroke in the autumn 9 years back. He told me my son drove a dark green Ford and had a thin scar through his right eyebrow from falling out of a hayloft when he was a boy. He told me he had Reuben's watch. He told me he had letters my son had written that I'd never seen. I could not get any air into my chest. If you have ever had the ground you stand on simply dissolve, in the space of a few sentences, then you know the exact feeling I'm describing. And if you haven't, I hope to God you never do. Everything I thought was settled and buried came unsettled and unburied in under a minute, standing at my own kitchen wall in my socks. I had spent 6 years building a quiet little life around a grave. And now a voice was telling me the grave had a secret in it. I want to stop here and be honest with you, the way I promised I would. Every reasonable part of my mind was telling me this was a scam. You hear about it constantly. People hunting lonely old men, learning a few details, calling in the dark to pry money loose. I knew all that. I'd read the warnings the bank sends. And still, there was something in how this boy said the word Granddad. It didn't sound greedy. It sounded like someone who had been holding that word in his mouth his whole life and was finally, terrifyingly, letting it out. "Where are you?" I said. "A payphone. I think it might be the last one in the state. I walked most of the night to reach it. I can't go back where I was. Please." He gave me a crossroads almost an hour north, up near where the country empties out toward Canada. I told him not to move and not to talk to anyone. I told him I drove an old gray sedan and I'd come as fast as the roads allowed. Then I hung up, and I sat for 30 seconds staring at that phone like it might speak again on its own. And then I got dressed. I want you to picture me, because it matters to what comes next. A 70-year-old man with a trick knee, pulling on long underwear and 2 pairs of socks in the dark. The only weapon in my house was my father's old shotgun, which I had not fired since the Reagan administration. I put it in the trunk anyway. I couldn't have told you why. It just felt like a thing a man ought to do when he's about to drive into something he doesn't understand. The plows hadn't come through. There were stretches where the snow was up over my hubcaps, and I drove by faith and memory, the headlights catching nothing but white coming sideways at the glass. And I had too much time to think. I thought about the last time I saw Reuben alive. It was Christmas, the winter before he died. He came up from wherever he'd been working that year, and he was quiet. Quieter than I'd ever seen him. We sat at this same kitchen table after the dishes were done, and we talked about the Vikings, and then we talked about nothing, and then he went still and said, "Dad, if anything ever happens to me, I want you to know I love you, and I want you to know I tried." I asked him what he meant by that. He didn't answer. He just turned his coffee mug around and around on the table and looked at the steam coming off it. I should have pushed him. I should have taken him by the shoulders. I didn't. I told myself he was a grown man with his own life and his own troubles, and that whatever it wasn't mine to pry into. 4 months later, 2 state troopers stood on my porch with their hats in their hands. And I believed every word of the accident they described to me, because believing it hurt less than the only other thing it could have been. I reached the crossroads a little after 5. The sky was just going the color of a healing bruise, that sick yellow-purple at the edges. There was a dark gas station on one corner, and across from it a little wooden bus shelter with a payphone bolted to its side. And there was a boy sitting under it. I have to be careful how I tell you what happened in my chest when I saw him. He looked maybe 16. He was wearing a thin canvas jacket that had no business being out in that cold, and boots a couple sizes too large, and his hair was the exact shade Reuben's had been at that age. Dark blonde, that I knew would go gold if summer ever came back to the world. He stood up when my headlights swung across him. And then he turned his face toward me, and I had to grab the steering wheel with both hands to keep them from shaking. He had Eleanor's eyes, my wife's eyes, pale gray, set deep, tilted up just slightly at the outer corners. I had courted a girl with those eyes, and married her, and buried her, and I had not seen them looking back at me in 9 long years. And now here they were, looking at me through a frozen windshield in the middle of nowhere, on the worst road in Minnesota. I rolled the window down. I couldn't speak. He said it again, quiet. "Granddad." "Get in the car, son," I said. "Get in this car right now." He climbed in and the smell came with him. Wood smoke and old sweat and something underneath it I couldn't place for a second and then could. Fear. The flat animal reek of a person who's been running so long their body has forgotten how to do anything else. I cranked the heat all the way, and he held his hands over the vents. And they were raw and cracked, and one of them had a filthy bandage wound around 2 fingers, dark with blood that had dried days ago. "What happened to your hand?" I said. "Later," he whispered. "Please, can we just drive?" So I drove. I pointed the car south toward home and I drove, and for 10 minutes neither of us said a word. He sat with his eyes shut and his hands over the heat, and I kept stealing looks at him because I could not stop. Every glance gave me something else. Reuben's jaw. Eleanor's eyes. A small crook at the bridge of his nose that had been on my son's face since the hospital nursery. This was my grandson. I knew it the way you know a storm is coming before the first cloud. Some things don't require proof. I'm going to pause the story here for a moment. because I think some of you watching right now know exactly what it is to be handed a second chance you never asked for and never thought you deserved. Maybe it came to you as a phone call, maybe a letter, maybe a knock. And maybe, like me, your first feeling wasn't joy. It was terror. Because the moment you let yourself love something again is the moment you've handed the world a fresh way to hurt you. I felt that fear in the car that morning, sharp as a blade. And I want to tell you what I did with it, because it's the whole point of everything that came after. I asked him his last name. Brandt, he said. My mom was Caitlin Brandt. The name meant nothing to me. But I asked him if his mother had known my son, and he opened those gray eyes and looked straight at me and said, she loved him. She said he was the only good thing that ever happened to her. She said he never even knew about me. She made sure he never knew, because of what her family was. What was her family? I said. He was quiet a long time. The wipers beat back and forth. Then he said, Granddad, I need you to believe me, and I know that's a lot to ask from a man I met 10 minutes ago. But the people who killed my dad are looking for me right now. And if they figure out you helped me, they'll kill you too. I kept my eyes on the road, and I felt something settle over me that I can only describe as a great and terrible calm, the kind I'd never felt in my life. Tell me all of it, I said. Start at the beginning. So he did. His mother, Caitlin, had grown up outside a hard little city in the Ohio Valley. Her father ran a freight and trucking outfit, the kind where some loads were legitimate and some were not, and nobody who wanted to keep breathing asked which was which. She'd met Reuben the summer he worked a pipeline job out that way. They'd had about a year together. She got pregnant, and when she told her father, he gave her 2 choices, and only 2. End it, or vanish with the child, cut off Reuben forever, and make certain he never learned the baby existed. She chose to vanish, to protect them all. She'd taken her son and disappeared into a small town 2 states away, waiting tables under a name that wasn't hers, raising the boy alone for 15 years. And somehow Eli didn't know how, and neither did his mother. Reuben had figured it out. He'd found her. He'd reached out. He'd started quietly sending money. He'd told her he wanted to meet his son at last. That was the spring my son died. My mom always said it wasn't an accident. Eli was looking out the window at the trees going by. She said her father had people everywhere. She said after Reuben died, her own father told her it was a message, and that if she ever breathed a word, the same thing would happen to me. So she made me promise. She made me swear I'd never come looking for you. What changed? I said, though I think I already knew. She died 3 weeks ago. His voice didn't break. It went flat, which was worse. Cancer. Fast. She'd known for months, and didn't tell me till the end. And the last thing she could say to me, before she couldn't talk anymore, was that I had to find you, that you were all I had left, that she was sorry she ever made me afraid. I had to pull over. I swung into the empty lot of a closed-up diner and put the car in park and pressed my forehead to the top of the steering wheel. I didn't weep, exactly, but something in my chest that had been clenched tight for 6 years came loose all at once, and it hurt more than crying, because here was the truth finally, plain as the snow on the glass. My boy did not die on a patch of ice. My boy died because he wanted to know his own son. He died reaching for the very thing now sitting in my passenger seat. If you have ever discovered, long after the fact, that a private grief you'd made your peace with was actually a wound somebody chose to give you, then you know there is no language for that particular kind of cold. I had mourned the wrong story for 6 years. I had forgiven a stretch of black ice that never existed. When I lifted my head, Eli was watching me with a careful, frightened look. Granddad, I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have brought this to your door. Where else were you going to go? I said. He didn't answer that, and I made him a promise right there in the diner parking lot, the heater rattling, the sky going gray. We're going home, I said. We'll figure out the next part together. You're not running anymore. I'd love to tell you the days after that were gentle, that we sat by the fire and traded stories and grew into each other slowly, the way new family is supposed to. That's not what happened. What happened is I took him home and fed him, and he ate like a boy who'd forgotten food, was a thing that came regularly: 4 eggs, half a loaf of toast, a whole package of bacon, barely a word the whole time. Then I put him in Reuben's old room, which I'd never changed, with the dusty track ribbons still pinned to the corkboard. He slept 14 hours straight. And while he slept, I sat at my kitchen table and I thought. I thought about the man Eli had named Marcus Brandt, the patriarch of that trucking outfit, A name I'd now started quietly turning over. I thought about my son, alone in a ravine in the dark. I thought about my grandson asleep down the hall with a bloody bandage on his hand and the smell of 2 weeks' fear still in his clothes. And I want to tell you something I've come to believe in the years since. There's a thing that happens to a man who has lost enough. The fear of losing more at some point simply burns out. You've already paid so much that the price of paying a little more stops frightening you. I'd lost Eleanor. I'd lost Reuben. I'd spent 6 years certain I had nothing left the world could take. And then the world set a 16-year-old boy on my doorstep and said, here's one more thing you could lose, try to keep it. So I made a phone call. I had a former student, a girl I'd taught in a U.S. history class more than 30 years back, sharp as a tack even then, who was now a federal prosecutor up in the northern part of the state. I'd written her a recommendation for law school a lifetime ago. I'd shaken her hand at her swearing in. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Her name was Diane Okafor, and she answered on the third ring and said, "Mr. Hartigan?" Because they never could get used to calling me anything else, my old students. 40 years on, I was still Mr. Hartigan. "Diane," I said, "I need a favor, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say a word." And I told her. All of it. Reuben, the boy, the Brandt family. A 16-year-old in my spare room who was both a witness to and a target of something I couldn't yet prove. When I finished, she was silent for a long while. Then she said, "Don't move him. Don't tell a soul he's there. Lock every door. I'm bringing 2 people I trust, and we'll be there tomorrow afternoon." And then quieter, "Mr. Hartigan, I'm sorry about your son. None of us knew." That, I said, was the whole point. Now I want to slow all the way down, because what came next is the part I've turned over in my mind more than any other, the longest night of my life. After Eli woke, I made a pot of stew, and we sat at the table, and I asked him about himself. Not about the danger, about him. And he told me. He told me his mother had taught him to read before he was 4. He told me about a mutt named Banjo he'd buried the winter before. He told me about a girl in his math class he'd never worked up the nerve to talk to. He told me he was good with numbers and wanted to build bridges someday, that he'd dreamed of a particular engineering school before all of this fell on him. "You can still go," I said. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't know. "I mean it." I set my spoon down. "Whatever we do about the rest of this, you are still going to college. You are still going to build your bridges. Your grandmother left money I never knew what to do with. I think now I was saving it for you. I just didn't know you existed yet." He didn't say anything for a while. He looked down into his stew. And then, almost too quiet to hear, he asked, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I show up before dawn with a story that sounds insane and you just believe it. You just take me in, why?" And I told him the truest thing I had. Because you have your grandmother's eyes, and because you came all this way to find me. And because if I'd been any kind of father at all, I'd have known your dad was frightened that last Christmas, and I'd have asked him what was wrong. I didn't ask. I'm not going to make that mistake a second time. Not with you. He started to cry then, without a sound, the way a kid cries when he's learned that making noise costs you something. I reached across the table and put my hand over his wrist, over the bandage, and we sat like that a long while, and the stew went cold between us. That night I slept on the couch with my father's shotgun across my knees. I didn't truly expect anyone. The boy had been careful 2 weeks on the move. Cash only, switching rides, sleeping rough. I told myself no one could possibly know where he was. And around 2 in the morning, headlights swung into the foot of my driveway and stopped. They sat there, idling. 30 seconds that stretched out like 30 minutes. I sat dead still on that couch with my hand on the cold barrel, and my heart going so hard I could feel it in my bad ear, and I stared at those twin lights through the gap in the curtains, and I thought, very clearly, so this is how it comes. Then the lights backed out and slid away down the dark street and were gone. Maybe a lost driver, maybe a wrong turn, maybe nothing at all. I sat awake until the sky went gray. I did not move once. I'm going to be honest, because I said I would. If you had asked me a week before whether I, Lowell Hartigan, retired schoolteacher, bad knees and a hearing aid, he would sit up all night with a loaded gun guarding a boy. I'd known for one day against men who killed for a living, I'd have told you that you had the wrong man. And maybe a week before, you would have. But that is the thing nobody tells you about courage. It isn't a feeling you're born with. It's a thing you do. Usually when you are exhausted and afraid, and would give anything to be allowed to look away. And you don't look away. Diane arrived at 3 the next afternoon with 2 people. A woman from the bureau, all business, and a quiet man who never took off his coat, and who I'm fairly sure was armed beneath it. They sat with Eli at my kitchen table for the better part of 4 hours. They asked questions. They wrote it all down. And Eli laid out the contents of the box his mother had left him: 16 letters from my son that I had never known existed, a handful of photographs, and a note in Caitlin Brandt's own hand, dated 3 weeks before she died. I read that note over Diane's shoulder. It told her boy that if he was reading it, she was gone and he'd chosen to find his father's people, and that he should tell them everything. Name names. Name the warehouse. Name what happened to Reuben. And it ended by telling him not to be afraid anymore, and that she was sorry she'd made him afraid for so long. I have thought about that note every day since. That is the bravest thing I have ever read. That is a dying woman spending the very last of her strength trying to cut her son loose from the fear she'd raised him inside. The bureau woman asked Eli if he'd be willing to testify. He looked at me. I looked at him. "It's your call, son," I said. "Whatever you decide, I'm standing right behind you." He said yes. I won't walk you through the long machinery of what followed, because most of it was lawyers and paperwork and sealed rooms, and that's not why you're here. What I'll give you is the shape of it. The Brandt family was real. The trucking company was real. Its ties to something far bigger were real. The federal government had been trying to build a case against these men for nearly a decade, and had never once gotten a witness willing to talk. They had a witness now. They had a boy with his mother's box of letters, and his grandmother's gray eyes. They moved us both. New names. A new house in a state I'm not permitted to name. I sold the place above the lake through a go-between. I left almost everything: my books, Eleanor's good dishes, the ribbons on Reuben's corkboard. I kept 3 photographs and my father's shotgun, and the watch my son was wearing when he died, which the troopers had once handed back to me in a plastic bag. The trial came the following autumn. Eli testified for 2 days, and I sat in the back of that courtroom and watched my grandson, 16 years old, sit up straight and tell the truth to a room full of men who'd have killed him for it. And one of those men, an old man with white hair and a face like cracked leather, looked across the room at me, once. Marcus Brandt, the man who'd ordered my son into that ravine. I want to tell you about him for a moment, because I promised you he wouldn't be a cartoon, and the truth is he wasn't. In a strange way I understood him. Here was a man who'd clawed his way up out of nothing, in a world that ate the soft alive, and who had come to believe, all the way down to the bone, that blood belongs to blood, that family is something you own and hold by force, because the second you let go, the world takes everything. He thought he was protecting his people. He thought his daughter's escape and his grandson's free existence were threats to the whole structure that kept everyone under his name fed and breathing. He was wrong. He was monstrously, unforgivably wrong. But he was not a man without a logic. He was a man whose love had curdled into ownership, and that, I think, is more frightening than simple evil, because it's so much more common. I made myself meet his eyes across that courtroom, and I did not look away. He went to prison for the rest of his life. So did 4 other men. The company was torn apart, and I will let you read about what they found in that warehouse on your own time, because I haven't got the stomach to say it out loud. Eli turned 18 that winter. He's in college now, building toward those bridges. He calls me every Sunday evening, and I've come to organize my whole week around the sound of that phone. He has a girlfriend whose name I'll keep to myself, because that's his story, and not mine to give away. And now I want to tell you the lesson. The one thing I'd hand you if I could hand you only one thing, because I paid the highest price there is to learn it. This story taught me that the people in your life will almost never send you a clear signal when they're drowning. They'll send you a small one, a long pause, a strange sentence over coffee, a look that doesn't match the words. And you will be tired, and the easy thing, the thing your whole body begs you to do, will be to let it go and tell yourself it's not your place. The mistake most of us make is believing we'll get another chance to ask. I had 4 months between that last Christmas and the troopers on my porch. 4 months. And I let silence fill all of it. A man named Marcus Brandt filled that same silence with a death warrant. That is the arithmetic of it. My son did not die because of ice. He died because nobody who loved him pushed hard enough to make him say what was wrong. And I was the one who loved him most. So here is the one thing I want you to actually do, not someday but tonight. Think of the person in your life whose silence has been bothering you, the one whose last text sat a little wrong, whose voice was off the last time you talked, and ask them the second question. Not how are you, which lets them lie. The one after it. No, how are you really? Drive the long road. Open the door even when it scares you, especially then. The cost of asking is almost always smaller than the cost of finding out, 6 years too late, what you could have stopped. And here's the question I'd ask you to sit with after you close this video. Whose small signal are you currently choosing not to see, because seeing it would cost you something? Now before I let you go, I want to hear from you, because I read every single comment that comes in, and I mean that with my whole heart. Tell me, comment number 1, if you think I was right to believe that boy, and drive out into the snow on nothing but a stranger's word. Comment number 2 if you think I was a fool who got lucky and should never have opened that door. Or comment number 3 if you honestly don't know what you'd have done at 4:20 in the morning with a dead man's voice on the line. There's no wrong answer. I've gone back and forth on it myself, more nights than I can count. And tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight, and whether it's warm where you are or cold like it was that February, because it never stops amazing me how far these stories travel. And if you've ever gotten a call, or a letter, or a knock that split your life clean in two, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me below. If this story moves something in you, do an old man a kindness and subscribe, so the next one I tell finds its way to you. I'm just a retired teacher on a porch in a town I'm not allowed to name, passing along the few things I learned the hard way. Pick up the phone, open the door. Go and get them, whoever they are, wherever they are. Don't tell yourself it can wait. It never could. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Duluth to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.